Welcome to the Beer Taster's Notebook, the show focused on beer education. I'm Jonathan Thompson, Advanced Cicerone, BJCP beer judge, and fermentation enthusiast. Welcome back to the Beer Taster's Notebook, episode 20, all about hop aroma. So we covered bitterness and their contributions from hops, and we did a basic overview of hops. So now let's talk about aroma specifically. So the simplest way to usually look at this is continental Europe versus Britain versus America the Old versus America the New, and then Oceania. This is obviously very simplistic, and we sort of covered the gist of this in episode 18, but just to reiterate, so continental hops tend to be earthy, spicy, and floral. British hops tend to be slightly more minty, woody, earthy, and spicy as well. American old hops, so sort of classic hops or the C hops, we're looking for resin, sort of dank pine and citrus notes. The newer American ones, and then Oceania as well, is basically a cornucopia of aromas and flavors. And that's where it gets really, really interesting. But first, let's just start off with what's actually making this happen. And so the aromas and flavor compounds are coming from three components. So hydrocarbons, oxygen-containing compounds, and sulfur-containing compounds. All of these are generally considered essential oils. It's a bit more complicated than that, though. So let's just go through some of the naming and clarifications. So the words terpenes and terpenoids seem to be thrown about interchangeably. They're not the same thing. A terpene is an unsaturated hydrocarbon. And it's mostly made by plants, although some insects produce terpenes as well. Termites, for example, use them as a defense mechanism, as do some ants, and for some signaling purposes. And so a lot of plant terpenes come from conifers, by the way. So you may associate the name a little bit with turpentine, which incidentally is derived from alpha-pinene, which is a terpene. And you'll also hear the terms monoterpene, sesquiterpene, and diterpenes. And so these refer to the number of carbons, so 10, 15, or 20 respectively. And then a terpenoid, it's not a terpene from another planet, but in fact, it's a modified terpene containing a functional group, which usually involves oxygen. So like a terpene alcohol would have a hydroxyl group attached. And so the naming with terpenoids is along the same lines. Monoterpenoids have 10 carbons, sesquiterpenoids have 15, et cetera, et cetera. A hemiterpenoid, by the way, has 5 carbons, and its terpene analog is called isoprene. And terpenoids are also called isoprenoids. And so another note on the terpenoids is they include all the terpene alcohols and other subcategories where they're based. So, they're based on the functional group. So there's a terpene aldehyde, there's a terpene esters, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so let's start off with the hydrocarbon fraction. So most of the hydrocarbons are monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes. A third category, which we refer to as aliphatic compounds, it's less commonly referenced. So the main thing to focus here on is those two, the monoterpenes and the sesquiterpenes. And so the main monoterpenes that we're going to encounter are myrcene, alpha-pinene, and beta-pinene. And so the most common sesquiterpenes we encounter are farnesene, alpha-humulene, and beta-caryophyllene. These are commonly just referred to as humulene, farnesene, and caryophyllene. And so myrcene, humulene, farnesene, and caryophyllene are touted as sort of the most common hop aroma compounds, and they somehow manage to make their way into almost every beer exam as well. So those are the 4 to remember. And myrcene can hold actually up to 80% of the monoterpene share, so it is by far one of the most prevalent in the hop aroma circus. And so other monoterpenes to be aware of are the pinenes, both the alpha and beta isomers, and they contribute, I'm sure you can guess, pine aroma. It is present in hops, of course, conifers, rosemary, and cannabis, and by the way, it's also flammable. So let's just touch briefly on the oxygenated fraction, or the terpenoids, if we prefer that. And so a few to be aware of: linalool. It's pretty key, actually, and contributes floral and citrus aromas. Geraniol, which has some citrus quality, but also like a rose petal-like aroma. And beta-citronellol has yet more citrus and some tropical notes. And I should also mention, we'll do a whole thing on this later down the road, but yeast can biotransform geraniol into citronellol, and a bunch of other biotransformations can happen with hop oils and yeast. And so I think a really clean way to maybe look at this is by aroma category. So instead of looking at the compound and then talking about the aromas, we'll talk about the aromas and then the contributing compounds. So for citrus aromas, and some of these are a little bit subjective. So where people often want to talk about grapefruit, it's almost more like a tangerine grapefruit, and you can test all these things, right? So get a beer, IPA, that's supposed to be heavy in grapefruits, for example, and then, like scratch off some grapefruit zest and really get accustomed to that and calibrate it, and then pull out like some of the flesh and taste it and smell it, and then go back and smell and taste your beer, and then try that maybe with a tangerine or an orange, and you'll see that it's a little bit off. Anyways, I mean, grapefruit is the general descriptor, so we'll just stick in our lane here. So we are talking about lemon, tangerine, grapefruit, and those kind of citrus fruits. Those come from the oxygenated terpenes. In other words, terpenoids, and these are linalool, citronellol, geraniol, and limonene. Limonene obviously is a very major contributor to lemon flavor, not only in the lemon, but also in the beer. The tropicals like mango and guava and pineapple and passion fruit are mostly from thiols. I did a whole episode on these, so I'll refer you to that. And then those floral, rose-like aromas are coming from linalool, geraniol, nerol, and alpha terpenoid, which are all terpenoids. And then, the pine and resin, those are coming from the hydrocarbon fraction. So back to the terpenes. These are the myrcene, alpha and beta pinene, and they're oxygenated derivatives like myrtenol. And so the herbal notes or the spicy notes often associated with noble hops. Spicy, by the way, is another terrible descriptor. I know this is a common theme with me, but I think that we need to rethink the way that we're talking about aroma descriptors. And I know I'm not the only one who says this, but we need to be a little more specific. Anyways, moving on, the noble hops rather get that sort of noble hop quality from the sesquiterpenes and their oxides. So humulene and humulene epoxide, caryophyllene and caryophyllene oxide. And these oxides are also what contributes that sort of woody character or earthiness. And so just moving on to the sulfur fraction, it's quite small, like very small, but it carries a massive stick. And the sensory threshold for these are quite low, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. So these are the thiols. We did cover this, as I mentioned, in episode 10, but we'll just kind of rehash here. So they're sulfur-containing compounds. So there's a sulfhydryl group that needs to be liberated because they currently remain bound. They're called bound thiols, and they need to be liberated by the yeast. And so these contribute the onion and garlic aromas, but when they're done right, and so of course we don't really necessarily want that, right? But when they're done right, you get these big bombs of passion fruit, white grape, gooseberry, rhubarb, blackcurrant, and then of course the famous cat pea. And so I think that's pretty good as far as an overview of all of the compounds. I mean, we could get really, really deep into all the chemical structures and such things, but it's kind of difficult to articulate that vocally. We'd need to put that in an article with visuals or in a video, and I shall do so in the future. But for now, we will leave it there, and we will move on to some of the hops. So there are over 300 varieties of hops out there and growing. We could probably whittle it down to, whittle up some of the obscure ones and then whittle it down to a more usable list. But I mean, that's going to be a really long listen and it would be just hard to retain, I think. And also my mouth is going to get tired. So let's just cover the big guys here. So Simcoe, Chinook, Columbus, referred to as the sea hops. And by the way, Simcoe is not a sea hop, but Cascade is. And so that fits into that category as well. And so those are the really big pine, resin, the dankness, the forest floor, these sort of the classic American hops, right? Columbus, by the way, is referred to as CTZ because Columbus, Tomahawk, and Zeus are relatively interchangeable. And so the so-called noble hops, which, by the way, this is just a marketing term, but it's stuck. And so this is how we refer to them. Anyways, they contribute that spicy floral sort of herbal quality. Like, so if you think about a Czech or German classic beer, nothing fancy, not a local interpretation, but something like, if you're looking at like Pilsner Urquell or, I'm trying to think of, Jever Pils. There you go. Whew. That was a tough one to spit out for some reason. Anyways, those have the qualities you're looking for, and these are coming from Satz, which is the Czech hop, Hallertauer Mittelfrüh, Tittnanger, and Spalt. Those are the three German contributions to that four hop noble category. Moving into Britain, so East Kent Goldings and Fuggle are the poster childs, I guess challengers in there too, but those are the earthy, woody, sort of classic British hops. And Challenger, by the way, offers some more sort of floral, spicy notes. So it does veer off the path a little bit there. Northern Brewer, that's a hop to be aware of. It is the hop for California Commons. So Anchor Steam, which is, doesn't exist and it keeps being resurrected and then taken back to the grave. But if you can ever find some, that's what you're looking for. And it is a woody and pine-like hop. Really classic. Now moving into sort of the newer aromas, Citra, Mosaic, Amarillo, they all offer newer tropical fruit aromas, sort of the new age of American IPAs. Moving into Oceania, Nelson Sauvin, Galaxy, Motueka, those all bring things like lime, white grape, melon, gooseberry, lychee to the table. Maybe we'll do a mega hop list episode. I don't know. We'll see. I mean, that might be kind of like listening to morning attendance, but yeah, who knows? And almost every week I seem to discover or it's announced as sort of a new hop, and then a lot of these come from crossbreeding and hybridization. But Nectaron, Peacherine, just are something I've been exposed to recently. Quite nice, and you can imagine what they taste like or smell like. And this just continues on and on and on. Hence why we're not going to go through every hop, because by the time I'm done, I have to start over again. Also, it's going to take a million years. So moving on, just to something to be aware of as a way to treat these is all of these aromas are extremely volatile, which is of course why we can sense them so well. But they blow off in the boil. So if you throw them in the boil, it just means that they're going to be gone by the time we get to beer. They also blow off with CO2 from fermentation, and they blow off from just blowing off. So this means that dry hopping is really the key here. And so double dry hopping and triple dry hopping and all these things seem to be the key to big, huge, massive aromas. Dry hopping, by the way, is adding hops into like sort of post-cooling. So in the fermenter, they can be pitched in sort of during fermentation prior to yeast pitch. They can go after fermentation. I mean, it's sort of the timing is up to the brewer. Double dry hopped refers to either a lot of hops, or double the hops, or different hop charges at different times. There's no real legal term there, so you never really know. But for the most part, it does seem like a lot of times it's sort of added into the fermenter and then added later on. And this way, we're getting more and more hop oils. This also allows us to let the yeast interact and perform some biotransformation, and this creates new flavors as well. And so I think just to close off here, let's just sort of do like a recap, right? So, the citrus and floral come from the oxygenated monoterpenes, so the terpenoids, tropical and dank from thiols, pine and resin and dankness from the monoterpenes, herbal and spicy from the sesquiterpenes and their oxides. And then the most common oils are, of course, once again, myrcene, humulene, caryophyllene, and farnesene, linalool and geraniol coming in the rear. And then just a note here. So IPAs are a great way to experience hop aromas. And the beer that all beer people seem to love to hate is the New England juicy, hazy East Coast IPA category. Any IPA, it's all the same thing, basically. And so these are showcases for hops. They're almost always dry hopped. There's going to be huge hop aromas in there. If you don't like them, at least smell them. If you want to get accustomed with hops, I mean, if you really don't like them, I'm not going to tell you what to do, obviously. But I think that these are unfairly maligned. They are delicious and they're popular for a reason. They're not nearly as bitter as the West Coast. I'll give them that. But they do allow for calibration and for acclimatization and for just experiencing the huge and vast world of hop aroma. So there's my public service announcement. I promise I'm not getting sponsored by Big Any IPA. This is just my opinion, but I do think that there's a lot of validity and foundation for it. Make sure that they're fresh. These beers oxidize very quickly and can get pretty disgusting pretty quick, especially after 3 months. Here in Ontario, the LCBO leaves their stuff on the shelves. In winter, when the heat's on, it's mistreating the beer, unfortunately. So try and get them out of the fridge. Buy them from the brewery. That's the best way to ensure freshness. But if not, just check the date on the bottom. It's not a big deal. Pouring properly is important. Use a stemmed glass with a bowl that curves in. A wine glass is fine in a pinch. Fill it no more than halfway. You want a lot of headspace in there so you can collect those volatiles and really get your nose in there and smell them. You treat your beer like wine. You should actually treat it better. And that's my opinion as well, but it's also pretty valid. I've got some videos on the Beer Tasters Notebook YouTube channel, so you can check those out if you want to see how I pour and sniff and how to taste beers. And I think that's pretty much it for this. So this marks our 20th episode, which apparently only 1% of podcasts make it to. So that's pretty exciting. But I do have a Mary Poppins bag full of stuff to talk about. So we're going to be getting into 40 and 50 and 100 before we know it. And, just a note, if you do like the show or find it useful or both, preferably, please don't forget to subscribe, review, rate, etc., etc., etc. And thanks for listening. Until next time, stay thirsty and stay curious.